I know you've heard it. You've been around a lot longer than I have. It's like every Amazon business model dies every year.
So I have the agency that does 20 mil. I had the private label brand that did 1 mil. And then I have the distribution arbitrage account that did 8 mil. And so these are the models that I've worked on. Amazon has made me a very wealthy man. By the way, 2 years ago, I was one of those guys that was talking about how this was dead. And then I opened up my account and I was like, this still works.
I am on with Stephen Pope, otherwise known as My Amazon Guy. He runs an Amazon agency helping brands scale. His agency does $20 million a year in annual recurring revenue. This guy has his own private label brands. He practices distribution arbitrage, which is a model that we're going to talk in detail about. This guy knows the full gamut of Amazon, and I'm really looking forward to talking with him. Stephen, thank you so much for the time, man. Really looking forward to our conversation that we have ahead. You've got so much knowledge. I don't even know where to start. So welcome, man.
Thanks for having me on, Corey. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't you start by just giving a background on you, your Amazon journey, and your agency, because I don't even think I can do your story justice. You've been around for quite a while.
All right, so I'll see if I can do this in a short manner. So I started out as a TV reporter and then had a coming of age moment where I was like, I'd rather be home in my pajamas. I'd rather be doing e-commerce, right? First thing I sold online was a Magic the Gathering Sliver Queen on eBay. Did that at age 12. I'd been buying and selling stuff online for a long time. I taught chess lessons like all the way through college before I became a TV reporter. So I've been in love with the idea of e-commerce for a long time. But when I did my career shift, I accidentally landed in e-commerce and started working for all kinds of random failed startups, from women's plus size clothing to kitchen equipment, gold and silver coins, even did telecom for a hot minute. And when I first started working at a women's plus size clothing company selling their clothes on Amazon, I was just fascinated. And I was like, this thing's amazing. I tried to convince them to like start doing FBA. Like back then you could do millions of dollars without even shipping your stuff into FBA. This was, I don't know, like 13 years ago or something. And so I just really fell in love with it. And along the way, I'd work at these failed startups. They'd go under. I worked for the British. I worked for the French. I worked for the Germans. I worked for the United States English, if you will.
Everyone but yourself at that point.
Yeah. And then at one point when I was working for a lighting company, they laid me off and I was making $200,000 as a 30-year-old. And I was like, did I freaking peak? Like, who's going to hire me at $200K at 30 years old? Like, I think I'm hot, but like, I don't know if anybody's going to hire me. After that 48 hours passed, kind of thought, well, what if I hired myself? And so I did. And then I made a LinkedIn post about how I was going to do some consulting while I figured myself out. And within 48 hours, I signed my first client. And that client is still with me 6.5 years later. So I've just had a really fun trajectory of being in the elevator on the way up. I've known nothing but success. I've made mistakes, even $2 million mistakes, but I've been very successful because of all of those challenges that have come across me. And I've tested every Amazon model. I've pretty much sold every single product. We currently, at My Amazon Guy as an agency, operate $1.2 billion in annual revenue on the US market on Amazon.com. And that's basically 1 out of every 200 transactions. So everybody listening to this has a product in their home that I've touched if you've bought 200 things on Amazon, and all of us have.
That's actually a crazy statistic that, I mean, it's smart of you guys to actually like do those numbers and figure out that statistic, right? It's like 1 out of every 200 orders. Like we touch basically 1 out of every 200 products that's sold on Amazon. It also sounds really good too, because everybody out there knows the sheer scale of Amazon. So when you put that stat in front of them, automatically legitimizes the agency and what you guys are doing there. So that's really cool. Now, there's a couple of ways I kind of want to dig into that origin story there. But the first direction that I think we can go is, you said that very first client that you ever signed 6.5 years ago from just a simple LinkedIn post, they're still with you today. Obviously, you don't need to go into like the details of that brand, but I'm curious about the details of that relationship. So when they responded to that post saying, hey, Stephen, we'd like to hire you, like, one, what did their business look like and what were you doing for them? Again, this was back 6.5 years ago.
Yep.
Compared to today. What does their business look like today? How have you guys helped them scale? And like, what are the services that you're providing them today that obviously differ from original?
When some brand is struggling to get off the ground on Amazon, and in this case, it was a supplements brand, they couldn't get past $4,000 a month in sales. It was an omni-channel publicly traded company. And so they were in Walgreens, they're in major retailers, et cetera. So they had 100 SKUs. So high SKU, maybe 20 of them were launched. They had UPC issues. The Chinese had hacked the GS1 barcodes. They actually bought them from GS1, but the Chinese hacked them. I've seen that on like 17 different supplement brands at this point. I think the whole supplement GS1 codes have been hacked. But in any case, it was a lot of catalog work. And so for somebody who wants to be doing wholesale agency work, if you were, or somebody that wants to rep these brands, be prepared to solve problems. Be
Hmm.
prepared to add value, because if I couldn't solve catalog problems, that relationship wouldn't have lasted 30 days. I already knew how to do every flat file template technique, error code, whatever, but I still had to get on the phone with seller support for 10 hours a week. I still had to file 100 tickets to update my single title, like just all the that we all go through as an Amazon seller. And so having brand registry control, super important, and very hard to get as an outsider. People are like, why should I give you control? Well, I can better sell your products if you give me control. And you're not really giving me control, you're just giving me a user invite. Right. So there's a lot of objection handling I think people have to go through and take care of. I wasn't a designer. I don't have a design background. I would say I'm an architect on UI. Like I understand like functionally like how something should flow. And I think Amazon has solved for conversion. So a lot of times I speak a lot about traffic gen strategies,
Hmm.
10 to 1 on building that out. But if you don't have PPC and you can't update the page, then you're just a glorified logistics partner. Just kind of like my framework of what I was thinking about. Over time, I had to learn how to do design. I had to build a brand store. I had to build A+ content, now brand stories. Then I had to get video editing and video ad. Then I had to hire other people to run things and figure out how to do personality profiling and like what clients do I want to work with? What's my ICP? What
Hmm.
employees do I want to hire? What's an ideal employee profile? And so I cracked the code on all of those, but it was a lot of troubleshooting. My spirit animal is a hummingbird. And I don't think every flower I go to has nectar, but I'm going to hit 1,000 flowers in a very short time frame when most people would hit one or two. And I'm going to figure it out faster than everybody else.
Getting a lot of reps in helps you in two ways. One, it helps you get better and see what you're good at, but also it helps you see, kind of like you said, like, oh, I knew way quicker probably than my competitors who wasn't a good fit for me, which if I didn't know that and I worked with competitors that weren't a good fit for me, they're just going to slow me down. They're going to hog my resources. And then it's going to take that much longer to scale because you're not clear on those metrics. But it sounds like you got clarity probably a lot quicker than others from putting those reps in, which I think is great.
The action dictates the strategy, right? The more
Yep.
action I took, the more strategy I had.
And then another point that you made that I want to touch on as well, and you kind of said it in passing, but it really resonates with some of the stuff that I talk to other guests on the show about. It's that you're solving a problem for a brand, right? So this comes back to the question of what are the main problems that you're seeing brands facing? And then how could maybe some of our audience members as wholesale sellers, maybe they don't have a huge agency behind them, but maybe they have like your agency that they could refer or other contacts behind them. How do they go about solving this problem?
So identifying the problem is like step one. And so when I realized that catalog challenges were something that nobody was addressing on YouTube content or helping brands do, it dedicated a lot of content to that. So like anytime a customer had a question, I would shoot a video to answer it. Doing this for 6.5 years, I've got 2,200 videos of content and I have this huge library, and I'm trying to become the Wikipedia of selling on Amazon. And I have a video on every Amazon error code, and I have a video on every Amazon selling technique. And I became that resource. When you're first starting out, you can't be the be all end all, but what you can do is you can audit these brands and tell them one thing that they're not doing that you can help them do. I call this the poke the bear strategy. You have to talk about the problem, not talk about yourself. Even in my early video content, I didn't talk a lot about me. I was very much like a news reporter. Hey, today we're going to be talking about XYZ. Here's why this matters. Here's the problem. Here's the solution. Done. 3 to 5 minutes. Every single video. And that really resonated with my core audience. And that's where a lot of, my sales came from, is people consistently seeing me help them or solve their problem. And I only need 1% of the viewership to hire me. I've got, 6 million hits on my YouTube channel, and 6 million hits has made me a $20 million ARR agency. That math checks out, like just being able to have that. I think when you are listening to this as a listener, writing down what problems you know how to solve and then going around and asking people, do you have this problem? Do you have this problem? And after you do this 20 times, it won't even take that long, 20 times max, you're going to have a pretty good idea that, okay, I talked to 20 brands. All 20 of them said I have problem A. None of them said I had problem B. Maybe I should focus on problem A. And then you
Yep.
start building content about problem A. And then all of a sudden you get your LinkedIn DMs, and all of a sudden you get your people emailing you and tracking you down, and you have an inbound process for your sales funnel. So that's kind of how I view it. I think problem identification is really important. Trying to manage PPC on behalf of these brands is becoming a PPC agency. As a
Right.
wholesaler or reseller, you don't want to spend any PPC because that hurts your margins and bottom line. But if you know how to solve catalog problems and fix a UPC code or change the brand name or load some designs, these are value props that you can go to these brands and retailers and say, hey, let me help you out. I can take care of this so you don't have to. And if you look at the largest Amazon sellers on Amazon today, Pattern being one of them, many of them are resellers, or sometimes it's called like the replen model, where you're just replenishing things. Spreetel is another big one, although I think
Hmm.
they're run pretty poorly. And so solve a problem, identify it, then go tell everybody you can solve that problem and create content around it.
And that's a fantastic model, right? It clearly works and extremely well. And I know we've got some people listening here that might be on the newer side, or maybe they don't create content for whatever reason. Maybe they've got a 9 to 5 job, so they can't post about Amazon on LinkedIn, or whatever reason. But to make it as tactical as possible, even for people in that position, right? Stephen talks about identifying a single problem, and then you said poking the bear, right? I like to think about it as like twisting the knife, right? It's like a lot of times if you can identify that single problem and make the brand aware of that problem, well, sometimes the brand doesn't know about it, and when you tell them about it, they're like, "Oh, that's a problem. Maybe we should get someone to solve it." But a lot of times the brand is already aware of that issue. They're like, "Damn, yeah, we know that our pricing is, fluctuates by 30% week over week. We just don't know how to fix it." But hey, we've got seller XYZ who just sent us a Loom video explaining that one singular issue that we know we have. Well, maybe let's set up a call with them and see if he might be able to help us solve it, right? And again, trying to bring it back down to the level of the people listening to this podcast that might be on the newer side, a really good strategy is exactly what I just said, right? You might not be a catalog wizard or a PPC wizard or know how to do this, that, or the other. And quite honestly, I don't either, right? I have people for that. But what you can do as a newer seller, you know what the Keepa graph looks like, and you know how to determine when a brand's pricing is, $20 today, and it was $30 last week, and it was $40 the week before that, and it's just all over
There's
the place.
tools. Yeah, tools that can help you figure that out.
Yeah, there's all kinds of tools, but it's so, I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that it's very effective for you just to record a 60 to 90-second Loom video of you talking into the camera saying, "Hey, Mr. Brand Owner, just wanted to point out this one issue that we noticed here on Amazon, XYZ." You kind of spell out the issue, you send it over to them. And if you do that 20, 50, 100 times, you're going to book 2, 3, 7 calls. And of those 2, 3, 7 calls, that's how you
You'll
land
close
your
one.
first,
Yep.
1 to 2 wholesale accounts, as not just a reseller who's just buying and selling their products, but as a reseller who's adding value, helping them solve problems, like Steven says. And then as you develop that relationship, well, that's how you position yourself to get some really good exclusive deals with some brands like this. Steven, would you agree with that? I mean, it sounds like that's kind of right up
Totally
your alley.
agreed. So this model has some pros and it has some cons. So the pros is it's very easy to get started and there's a low barrier to entry. The
Mm-hmm.
con is that because there's a low barrier to entry, these brands can be persuaded to leave you or to date around and sleep around with other resellers at the cost of your sales. When you first start to get anybody, just make a purchase and get in the door, right? Learn the process, add value. But as you get more sophisticated, having a contract with these guys saying that you're the exclusive reseller and here's why, and here's what you'll perform, and here's the SLA, standard level service agreement, and being able to deliver that value will lock them in for 1-2 years at a time so that you can make the time investment into the listing to justify you hiring a designer to build out A+ content, to justify you fixing the UPC code because the Chinese hacked all the GS1 codes, for you to justify building out a brand store and then linking their SKU, which won't link to the brand store correctly today. But when somebody clicks on the brand name, it goes to the search page and shows their competitor ads instead of
Yep.
going to their brand. Obviously, all of these make really great Loom videos that you can send out as you solve these problems. But most of the time, I think the sellers are aware of the problems. They just either A, ignore them, or B, solve them through another means. And a lot of the time it's ignore because they care more about their distribution. And the guy you're working with is some sales rep who has no comprehension of Amazon whatsoever. And they get commissioned for selling product, and that's all they care about.
Yep, and all of those are great points. And so another point that you made that I kind of want to touch on is if you're going to do all this work for a brand to, let's just say, touch up their catalog or help them create a brand store, doing all these things that we know help brands grow, I think a lot of sellers, especially newer sellers, they hear that word exclusive, or they hear that, or at least maybe a brand even like dangles that proposition in front of their head. It's like, well, hey, if you help us clean up XYZ, then we'll discuss an exclusive. And so, the seller gets all excited and puts in all this legwork and puts all this work in up front. And they get 2 or 3 months down the road and the problem's now fixed. But then the brand owner says, well, yeah, I know we had said that we could do that, but now we're going to go a different direction. Right. So it's
Happens all the time.
it happens. It's happened to me plenty of it. It does happen. So I think there's a fine line though, between like as a newer seller, especially if you don't have a track record, you want to get a foot in the door. And so you want to do good work to kind of prove yourself. But at the same time, you want your downside covered. You want your time and monetary investment covered by at least some sort of contract or promise of future business. Now, a good kind of compromise that has worked well for me, and Stephen, I'm sure you've probably heard of people doing this in the past, but let's say I'm talking to a brand owner and they've got a 50 SKU catalog on Amazon, and just like any brand, right? They've got 3 or 4 SKUs that are crushing it for them. They've got 25, 30 SKUs that are middle of the line, and they've got 10 that are just complete dogs that they just need to cut. And so a pitch that's been effective for me is to say, hey, well, I'm not going to ask you to sign an exclusive, right? I don't even know you. We just met. However, if you let me work my magic on maybe one of your middle tier SKUs, one that you don't even care about, right? Let me get that SKU from X to Y over the next, let's say 60 to 90 months. And if I can do what I say I can do, then can we at least have a conversation around, one of your top 3 SKUs or one of your top 4 SKUs at that point? So that way you're kind of providing them with like a low risk proposition of, well, hey, if he messes us up, we don't really care about the SKU anyways.
They're
But if he
not going
does
to say no to that. Yeah.
right, yeah, and I'm just trying to think of ways that are low risk for the brand while also being low risk for you, but more upside. Like, would you see that as a viable foot in the door, especially for newer wholesale sellers?
Absolutely. But I think primarily they care more about the size of your PO. Right. And so
Hmm.
I would leverage that as well and be like, hey, my opening PO might be $5,000, but if I could do 50 grand, will you give me exclusive rights? Or if I do 20 grand, will you limit it to 3 resellers? Or can I have exclusivity on these 3 SKUs? Tying it to PO orders will make them happy because that's all they think about.
Yep.
Most of these brands that you're talking to.
I mean, that's something, brand or distributor, right? We've talked to distributors where they'll say, well, hey, in fact, I talked to one last week. There's a brand that we're selling right now. It's an awesome brand. It's ranked top 10 in a main category. It's hundreds of thousands of units per month. We're obviously not exclusive on the listing, but we talked to the distributor. We said, hey, how much would it take? Like, I literally jokingly was like, well, hey, how much would we have to buy to lock this thing down? He's like, oh yeah, 40 million a year and it's yours, right? 40
Nice.
million a year and this brand's yours. And I was like, okay, I'm like, good to know. And like, I literally like laughed out loud because I didn't even expect him to give me a number, but right off the top, he's like, yep, 40 million, it's yours. But again, it just goes to show that like every brand has a number, even if you have no relationship with them. If you walk up off the street and you've got deep pockets and you're not going to just, completely tarnish the integrity of their brand on Amazon, then there is a number. So that's a good point there as well. Now, so we were kind of talking before we hit record here about your Amazon business. I know you've got your brand. I think you just sold it recently. Is that correct?
Yeah, I sold my brand because I lost my brand registry and Amazon has become such a headache for this account. I was like, I need a break. I need to focus on the agency. And simultaneously, I started up a distribution account, retail arbitrage. I call it distribution arbitrage to kind of set it apart from other models where I'm arbitraging at the distributor level specifically. And my PO sizes are generally between $50,000 and $250,000. We did a 500K order twice, I think, in the last year alone. It grosses $8 million a year. So I have the agency that does 20 mil. I had the private label brand that did 1 mil barely. And then I have the distribution arbitrage account that did 8 mil. And so these are the models that I've worked on. Amazon has made me a very wealthy man. But anyway, so the models all have their various like pros and cons. But as an influencer, talking about my own private label brand, I had a very hard time because everybody was attacking it, duplicating it, ripping it off.
Right.
And when you're making content and videos, that's like no problem. But I hit my breaking point when Black Friday rolled around and my Tumblr business was completely banned from Amazon.com. And I was like, well, there goes a
And that
quarter
was
million
just all of a
dollars.
sudden, like
Yes.
was that from competitors doing black hat stuff, or like, can you go into
No.
details?
So probably somebody that didn't like me or a competitor was like, Steven's selling this IP infringement stuff and he's got Star Wars cups and look for the light, this and that. And, I have parody content. It's
Hmm.
100% legal. It's ethical. I've never had an IP infringement on my account, ironically, but somebody at Amazon looked at the business, saw that I was doing $1 million selling tumblers, and was like, you know what, we're not going to allow that anymore. No more parody tumblers, and closed the entire subcategory. So you can't even find somebody doing this anymore. And it shut it down. I tried to fix it. I spent months on it. I was like, this is a waste of time. It's a waste of resources. It's no longer fun. I get up in the morning and I dread going to my computer. So I had to walk away, and I'm making plenty of money in other places. But I think the reason I did so well as an agency is because I was so public about my journey. And now my
Hmm.
journey hit like this huge roadblock. And so I've had to kind of embrace and talk about that. And I haven't talked about my distribution account very much. And I don't show it. I don't tell people how I source my products or anything, because I'm afraid about being bid again, about just like my private label brand was attacked from some random dingbat, and I don't want to get it shut down. But what I can speak to is it's a replicatable model. It's basically just a big bankroll, right? Like
Hmm.
if you have lots of cash and you can make really big PO purchases, you can find people, distributors, who are willing to sell you things at a discount and liquidate, and then you flip it on Amazon. And it's the same concept of every arbitrage account ever, just at a
Hmm.
large scale.
First of all, I love the fact that you've used these multiple models, right? Like you started with private label. Obviously, you're managing the private label brands of hundreds of different companies, but now doing this distribution arbitrage that you're calling it. And I think that it really helps validate that model. I know you've heard it, you've been around a lot longer than I have, but it's like every year somebody's talking about every Amazon business model dies every year, right? And it's like, oh, private label's dead or arbitrage dead or wholesale's dead. It's like,
None are
if I
dead.
had
It's
a,
like radio
it,
and TV. They dwindle, but they're always going to have a core, right?
yeah. And it's like, if I had a dollar every time somebody told me wholesale was dead, I wouldn't have to sell on Amazon anymore. Like it's actually insane how often I hear that.
By the way, 2 years ago, I was one of those guys that was talking about how this was dead. And then I opened up my account and I was like, this still works.
Yeah. Well, hey, I'm glad you found the light. I want to be respectful of, keeping your information private, but as much as you're willing to share, if you would be open with us about that. So you said that mainly you're buying from distributors. A lot of people in our space, especially newer sellers, they get caught buying from like these liquidation companies or these garbage suppliers that aren't legit. They get hit with a section 3 and they're completely done. So with your buys, I assume you're buying, and correct me if I'm wrong, are you buying from like these big authorized distributors and maybe you just have a really good in with a sales rep who will sell you some of this stuff?
I would say like 20% of the model would be close to that, but the bulk of it is buying liquidation from shady partners, I would say.
Okay. Well, I'm very like I love that you're just like, yep, that's what it is. Like you're just not hiding behind that fact. So I love that. But what's the reasoning? Like, are you not scared?
Well, I mean, I get burned on occasion, right? We dumped 400K into a buy from some guys, and they shipped the goods over, and we had a good time and good deal. And then we started unpacking the goods, and we look at the packaging, and holy shit, it's all in Russian. And we're like,
Oh no.
oh my gosh, like
Oh no.
there's no recourse. It's like back of the napkin type of
Yep.
deal. So you demand a refund, you try and take them to court or whatever. You could take the chance or risk selling the Russian goods on FBA, but then burn, there goes your account potentially. Or you try and resell them and reliquidate it at a loss. That's kind of where we're at. So like really bad things can happen, but by and large, even with that 400K in dead inventory or whatever, I still have an 18% net margin. And so the model checks out, and usually private label brands are pretty happy with 15% net. And so even with some mistakes along the way, I'm beating the current, market by 3%. And I'm pretty happy with that. And the other thing is I don't have to spend time on the account at all. My partner does all of the heavy lifting and I finance it. And that's really great for me. Allows me to spend time doing my agency, allows me to travel, tons of stuff that I can go do. Whereas the private label, I have to like, watch it more. It's not passive income. Listings go down, like, tickets got to get filed, shipments got to be made. Whereas with this model, it's way more easy to automate. That's what I really like about it. It simplifies the model. There's less to work on. It just becomes a game of logistics and finance. And the marketing piece is not a component of this particular model. Obviously, I'm not going to go buy liquidation for a brand nobody's heard of, because then I'd have to go market it. Most private label brands spend most of their time marketing, and that's where they fail. And that's where the costs are incurred. But for a replan model, for an arbitrage model, you spend all your time sourcing, logistics, and financing. And that's actually less than what a private label brand does.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And I guess my main question was around the idea of just like account health, right? So if a lot of the stuff that you're getting is from these liquidators or from, I mean, you said it yourself, right? Guys that might be considered a little shady. I mean, are you not worried at all about account health? Because at least,
No.
again, and so why is that? And I'm asking a legitimate question because like I've dealt with account health issues. I know plenty of people that have, and like I've been shouting from the rooftops, don't buy from liquidators, only buy from the brand or from authorized distributors. But you're saying, hey, I'm doing pretty much the opposite of that and I'm not worried. So I want to hear why. Is that because the account's really aged and has like, what am I
The
missing
larger the
here?
account is, the more you can get away with. Also, because these are pump and dumps, I guess, we're basically coming in and blowing through the load 30 days max time frame. It's very difficult for a retailer to come after us or report us. And we are selling authentic goods, to be clear. And so, yes, we have to supply an occasional invoice. Yes, there's a category gating issue here and there, but there's certain things that we've learned to do to keep it in a healthy state. But I think a lot of the precautions that a lot of sellers talk about, like having IP, keeping your internet protocol protected, or logging into a server, and having multiple accounts, like I don't follow any of that. I pretty much know Amazon's connected all of my stuff. I have 1,000 accounts with all the brands I can log into right now. And I'm very confident they know who I am. I'm very confident they've got all of my stuff tracked, and I don't worry about it at all. Some of the things you do need to worry about is like making sure to avoid like a section 3, don't ever have your admin email address attached to any other account ever, period. End of story. Making sure you have a unique credit card, unique bank account, the tax infrastructure is legitimate. One thing that's unique for us is, we have our own warehouse, we have a physical presence. And so some people who are just getting started, they flip it directly from the shady distributor and then into Amazon, and then that address is in your account. And that's where I think a lot of the challenges come from. But because, we're touching it and it's going straight into Amazon from us, we haven't run into those kinds of problems.
And it's very interesting to hear that perspective. I've been basically preaching the opposite of your business model for the last like 6 months or so, really ever since I dealt with that Section 3 issue, right? Because I mean, I beat it, no problem. We're selling just fine. But I feel like it's my duty, especially because a lot of newer sellers are kind of guys that are starting, listen to me, that I need to just point them into the safest possible direction, which is buying directly from the brand or buying from an authorized distributor.
I would endorse that. I would say doing what you're doing until you have a warehouse makes the most sense. But once you have a warehouse, or once you're at that scale, you can make these bigger plays. And so that becomes my moat that protects my model, because most people can't finance what we're doing.
Okay. And that makes sense. Yeah. And also too, like somebody like yourself, you are much more experienced than a new seller. Like, the nuances, what to look out for, what a shady supplier, a shady deal looks like.
Yeah, but until
Much
the
more
Russian
so.
goods show up, I mean, so it
Right.
just still happens to me even.
Yeah, for sure. No, again, the point I'm trying to make is that, because I know there's going to be some guys that listen to this and are like, oh, well, if my Amazon guy is buying from liquidators, like we can too. And it's like, well, hold on now. Like his account is moving 8 or 9 million a year in goods. So Amazon is going to be much less likely to shut him down than they are, seller account that was created 3 months ago that has like $200 in net sales. Also, how old is that account that you're selling on there?
2 years, that's it. I think people put too much stock in aged accounts. So an aged account could come with a lot of history that you don't want to be
Bad
associated
history,
with,
right? Yeah, that's
right?
so true.
And so I think it's totally fine to open up new accounts, no problem. Like Amazon's cool with you having multiple accounts. People get Section 3 because of drop shipping association typically, or multiple accounts where some of the information has been cross contaminated. Kevin King on LinkedIn 2 weeks ago, he's talking about how he sold one of his accounts and then it was used by a bad actor. And then it led to a suspension on his current account that he didn't sell
Oh,
because
damn, I
it's
didn't know that.
because his information was cross contaminated. And so that's a net advantage to not selling your account and getting that 5 or 10 grand to sell your aged account if you plan on selling on Amazon again. If you're out, I would take the money and run. So a lot of things can happen with account contamination, and there is a lot of bad actors out there, unfortunately. But one of the other keys to success that we have found is through SOPs and standard operating procedures. And like we've
Oh yeah.
documented just everything we possibly can. And we actually have a special offer for your audience. We sell both Amazon SOPs and agency SOPs. And if you guys want to get the Corey discount or the brand rocket discount, just go to myamazonguy.com/brand rocket and you guys can get money off of our SOP program. And this can help you guys with your wholesale programs and know like how to solve these problems you guys run into.
First of all, if you're listening to this and you are following the model of working directly with brands and more than just buying and selling, right? Actually partnering with these brands to show value like Steven recommends, guys, pick up these SOPs because if one of the SOPs saves you, I don't know, a couple hours of time, how much is that worth, right? And these are the processes that you can then implement into the brand's businesses that you're pitching. So instead of you having to go out and pitch a brand on something that you have no idea how to do, you enter the conversation with the step-by-step SOP and you can confidently say to the brand, hey, this is exactly what we're going to do. Step 1, 2, 3, XYZ to get you this exact result. And then there you go. And then you have a much more convincing pitch. So thank you for that, Steven. I think that's
My pleasure.
a huge value add there.
And we've done that, thousands and thousands of reps. So check that out, guys. myamazonguy.com/brand rocket. We'll have that special offer available to your audience.